It almost looks like Costco, but instead of TVs and fruit snacks, the floor-to-ceiling metal industrial shelves are full of bags of seeds, which is the reason why the air smells a little like dried out alfalfa. A loud mechanical clanging coming from one side of the building grabs your attention, and as you round a corner of shelves, you see a large machine where men are dumping bags of seeds into an opening. Like a KitchenAid mixing chocolate chips, butter, and flour, the machine combines different types of seeds into one big mixture that is then poured into a large ton-sized bag. You would never know from looking at the outside of the unassuming tan warehouse that this facility helps reseed much of Utah's landscapes after a wildfire. This is Wild, a Utah Division of Wildlife Resources podcast. I'm your host, Faith Heaton Jolly, and this is episode 24, Replanting Utah. Welcome back to Wild. We are in the Salt Lake City office today and studio. And I don't know if everyone can hear this on the recording, but we can definitely hear it. It sounds like we're like at an airport about to take off. Our AC is working overtime because it's so hot. And so it just feels like it's really loud in here, but maybe that's just me. So today I have Danny Summers here. He is our habitat restoration coordinator. Actually, you work out of Price. Or no, not Price. Ephraim. Yes, exactly. So he did make the long, lonely trek to Salt Lake today. So we're glad that he's here to do this podcast episode today. First off, Danny, kind of tell us what it is that you do for the division and kind of how long you've worked for DWR.
Yeah, so I've worked with the Division of Wildlife for about 17 years, and then even some time as a seasonal before that. And in my career, I've worked in the habitat section the entire time. Started out with our range monitoring program, went to Ephraim to our seed warehouse and a habitat research station there called the Great Basin Research Center. From there, I've taken various positions, and now, like you said, I'm the habitat restoration coordinator, so I help oversee our restoration programs and how we work with other agencies through the Watershed Restoration Initiative to improve habitat for wildlife, and also still continue with research on how we can do that better.
So in a nutshell, you do all the things, everything, basically.
Help others do that, yeah.
Yeah. And you actually did for a minute. Danny was working here out of the Salt Lake office, but decided you hated it. He's like, there's too many people in the city. Get me out of here.
That, and it costs a lot of money up here.
That's true. Because you actually do you live in Ephraim?
I do.
You do, okay. And that's a little bit shorter of a commute than having to drive back and forth to Salt Lake every day.
Right.
As you may have guessed from our intro and our title of the podcast, we are talking specifically today about our Great Basin Research Center and Seed Warehouse. Like everything else with the division, there's like 17 words in the name of it. But it is super cool. So kind of talk to us about what exactly that is and how long it's been in operation.
So the Division of Wildlife has been restoring habitat for wildlife really since the 1950s. Back then, there were some deer die-offs that caused us to look at what the problem was, and we found that we needed to restore some of the wildlife, especially at that time, winter ranges.
They need food and water to survive. Surprise,
Right.
Surprise, yeah.
And back then, you couldn't just go to the store and purchase the seeds that you needed to restore those ranges. So there was a lot of research done with some partners with the Forest Service and others on, okay, well, how do we grow these plants? How do we get seed from them? How do we put them back out on the ground to restore this habitat? And so that project began then and has grown over the years and evolved over time into what it is today. It was kind of a modest beginning, and then for a long time it was just an old barn that we stored some seed in and did little projects here and there at time. But as we determined there was more and more need, in 2004 we built a modern large warehouse to house seed and to be able to use that for restoration around the state. And that kind of came online about the same time Utah's Watershed Restoration Initiative came up. And so we were in a good position to help make that initiative successful by providing seed and equipment to do habitat restoration.
Awesome. And I am planning a future episode about the Watershed Restoration Initiative. We'll dive right into that more as well. So this is kind of a good intro to that. But basically the idea of manually kind of interfering, I guess, with nature and planting different plants that are beneficial for deer and other wildlife, that concept has been around since the 1950s, you said. And that's kind of when we started this idea of like a seed warehouse, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah, how do we grow these plants that you can't just go to the store and pick them up? How do you grow them? How do you put them back out on the ground and get habitat back?
And you said the current kind of facility that we use right now has been there since 2004. It's kind of the same building that's in Ephraim today. Okay.
Yeah, it's a 26,000 square foot warehouse that we can store seed in for longer periods of time when we are able to buy it at good prices and use it later when we need it.
And it is super impressive. Here's the little inside knowledge. I went down the end of 2019. We were doing kind of a tour of the facility, the warehouse. So I took a little field trip down there, and it's super impressive, like such a cool facility. And I actually recorded a podcast episode then that ended up getting deleted. So we're redoing that, obviously, because it's so cool and I want to kind of educate people about it. But it is impressive, and it's much bigger than I was expecting it to be. And like you said, we store seeds there. So kind of talk about how that works, kind of the seed operation. What kind of seeds do we typically use, and where do we get those? Like you said, you can't just buy them at a store. So kind of how does that all work?
It's been an interesting process to learn about, and kind of going from that beginnings back in the 1950s up until today. As we learned how to do this, there were a lot of individuals who helped come work on that project and then worked with the division and others. And then now they've gone and started their own businesses where they collect wildland seeds. They go out on the landscape. Sometimes in the fall, if you're driving down the highway, you'll see somebody out with a tennis racket beating on a sagebrush plant.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And they're collecting sagebrush seed or rabbitbrush seed or other wildland shrubs.
So they kind of helped on this side of things, like, oh, we know we need to have these type of plants for wildlife. And then they went and kind of opened their own private business to supply those seeds.
Yeah, and so there's 5 to 8 different vendors in the Sanpete Valley alone.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of the center of the wildland seed collection in the western United States. These vendors, they're out and they know how to collect seed, and then they sell it to us. They sell it to the Bureau of Land Management as the other big player on the seed market of wildland seeds in across the western United States.
Gotcha. And they're like manually collecting these seeds in a lot of instances. Like you said, they're literally using a tennis racket to like get little seeds off of a bush or something.
Yeah, in a lot of cases there are. I mean, when they can mechanize it, they do. There's kind of 2 ways for us to get seed. There's the wildland collected, which those are often the shrubs and forbs, which are flowering plants. Sometimes those have to be collected that way. A lot of the grasses that we buy are taken from the wild and then grown in a field, and then they're much more easily grown agronomically, and so farmers, growers, and vendors can grow those, and those can be grown where you have a favorable climate. So a lot of the seed we buy is from all around the West. Seed is certified as what the genetics of that different variety or plant is, and so you know what you're buying and you know how it's going to perform on the landscape, so you know where to plant it and have it be successful, hopefully.
Gotcha. So it's stuff that we know can survive basically in our climate or a similar climate. And so we're not going to spend a ton of money buying stuff that's just going to die or whatever, freeze or something. Okay, that makes sense. Once we basically buy those seeds and we ship them or however we get them to the warehouse, talk about kind of how they're stored and kind of what goes into that.
We usually buy all our seeds. We put it out for bid for all these different species. Last year we had over about 100 different species within the warehouse. Some of that's from a few pounds to thousands and thousands of pounds of different species.
And give an example of like some of those specific types of seeds or plants that we're looking for.
Some of the common grasses we use are like blue bunch wheatgrass and western wheatgrass and sandbird bluegrass. Those are some of the native grasses we use. There's some introduced species that are used when we need their characteristics that they'll compete with weeds and things like that, like crested wheatgrass and some others. We buy a lot of sagebrush seed and kochia and four-winged saltbush, other shrubs that are going to be beneficial to wildlife. We also try to buy a lot of, they're called forbs, or they're flowering plants. Forb's a fancy name for that, I guess. And they're important to provide nutritional needs for wildlife and pollinators and things like that. They're one of the more, that's kind of one of the limiting factors on the market, is they're harder to grow and more expensive and a little less available. But that's some of the research that's continuing to be done to try to get more of these flowers and things onto the landscape.
So we're getting kind of a good variety of different types
Right.
of plants and things. And you'd mentioned some of them are more expensive just kind of because they're harder to get. Are some also kind of more expensive to store?
Yeah, so in our warehouse, to keep seeds viable, the thing to do is to keep them cool and dry. So in our warehouse, we have most of the big open warehouse. We keep it cooled in the summer by bringing in cool night air. At the hottest days of the year, our warehouse really is only getting up to maybe 70 degrees. And
Yeah, it's intense. It's like a whole climate controlled
Right.
thing. Like it's like 700 degrees outside like it is right now. And you walk in, you're like, oh, this is nice.
so for most of our seeds, we have big pallets and shelves that they're all sitting on there in the warehouse. But then we do also have some coolers. You can fit about 150,000 pounds of seed in two different large coolers where we keep it about 37, 38 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's frosty. They're like giant walk-in coolers,
Right.
like at some kind of grocery store or Costco or something. Yeah,
And we also dehumidify that, keep it as dry as possible. And
those are for the high maintenance plants.
right. And one of the main species we use that for is big sagebrush.
Okay.
Which it's a very tiny little seed, and so when it comes off the plant, it really is only viable for that first year. And in order to store it, you have to keep it cool and dried if you want to store it for a longer period of time. And so that's shown to be effective at keeping that, and that's a really key species for big game, especially mule deer that use it in the winter. And
Right.
the sagebrush communities throughout the West are one of the most threatened communities out there, and we're trying our best to restore that and protect those.
How many different plant or like seed species are you housing at one time at the warehouse?
At any one time, we probably have 80 to 100 different species. And,
Oh, wow.
and like I said, some are only a few pounds that we only can collect, are very specialized, specific site or a specific area. And then we have others that are more generalist, that we call them our workhorse species, that we can kind of use broadly across the state in various locations as project managers plan projects.
And I think it's like over 1 million pounds total that you can keep at one time, right?
Yeah, our the capacity of the warehouse is about 1.1 million pounds of seed. Last year, we mixed and distributed about 1.3, 1.4 million pounds. So
It's
it
so
was
much.
it was tight, and
Yeah.
we were putting seed in every corner and under every
Busting-
nook and cranny that we could.
Busting at the seams, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's pretty impressive. Like, and it's a huge warehouse, and it's like all these tall shelves, like you said. It's a whole thing. There's seeds everywhere. How do we decide which areas get reseeded, basically?
The Watershed Restoration Initiative, which I guess you'll talk more about, is kind of the driver of this. It's a really neat collaboration of lots of different agencies, individuals, private landowners working together to improve watersheds and habitat across Utah. These different groups, the state is split up into 5 different groups where they come together and prioritize projects together, and the goal of that is to work across land ownership boundaries and working together collaboratively, not just one group working up to their fence and stopping, but working across those boundaries to do the best for the landscape. And there's various different criteria that they have to meet to be able to be funded. And as they do that, and we have different priorities and focus areas to work on to address some of the threats and problems for different habitats. So once those projects are funded, then we can we buy the seed that they need for their various projects, and usually most of that work will take place in the fall.
Gotcha. And so it's kind of based, like you said, there's criteria or whatever that, kind of ranks and prioritizes where should get reseeded first or whatever. Talk about how like wildfires play into that? Because that's kind of an emergency thing that
Right.
maybe we weren't planning on, but now there's this huge chunk of land where deer usually spend the winter and now all their food's gone. So talk about, kind of where those fall in. And
So we have those two main aspects. We have this proactive management work that we're doing. A lot of it is fuel reduction to help prevent or minimize the effects of wildfires, and
Right.
and then those projects are planned here in the late spring and summer, and then as we go through summer into the fire season, we get these. That's one of our big opportunities, and is to respond to those fires and to improve and restore that habitat after those fires. So that's a pretty critical. We view that as one of our top priorities, is to be able to restore after wildfire, and so then we assess our needs and often have to purchase. On some of these big years, have to purchase a lot more seed to try to get that out on the landscape. And you kind of have a window of opportunity after a fire, after you've kind of got a clean slate. We don't want that to come back as weeds, and we want it to be functional habitat and rangeland. So
it's a seed emergency. You're like, we got to get this planted ASAP.
Yeah, one of the big threats we deal with is cheatgrass. That little annual grass that is, gets in your socks if you walk through it, and
it's the worst.
It causes a fire cycle to increase over and over again. So we want to get perennial plants planted that will compete against it and provide wildlife habitat
before that stuff comes in and
Right.
takes over. Right. Yeah, it is. I know it's like people probably didn't know that there were seed emergencies, but there are seed emergencies. Like, this is kind of high stakes stuff to, like you said, there's that short window that you got to get in and like get the good stuff in before there's all these kind of invasive plants.
Everybody does hear often about the flood events that happen after fires. We're trying to stabilize soils, and that's a bit of a slow process. People want that, and we would like to have that fixed overnight as well, but it takes a little bit of time to get some of those plants back to stabilize it.
Right. And so kind of once you either pick the areas you're going to reseed, or you have a fire and you decide what you're going to do, kind of talk about like how you decide what types of plants are going to go there. Yeah. Because there's like this whole process don't you guys call it like a seed mix or whatever?
Right, So each project that we seed has a custom seed mix. There's not one singular recipe or multiple, that we do. Each different project manager that is working on a project out on the ground, he looks at the different environmental factors. How much precipitation does the site get? What kind of soil is it growing on? Then we look at, what is the objective of the project? What are we trying to restore? What kind of habitat? What are we trying to hold soils? And so they look at all those different factors. What are the objectives of what they're trying to do? And then use what kind of seeds we have available to us to plant to try to meet those objectives as best as possible.
Right. And I love that you call it a recipe, because I totally, the whole time I was doing the tour, and they're like, there's like these huge machines, and they are like dumping bags of this and a little bit of that. I felt like it was like they're like baking cookies with just all the little seed ingredients, and mixing this whole batch together that they can bag up and send off to the different parts of the state.
Everything we get comes as a single species, and then we mix it together. We have a big mixer where we're mixing thousands of pounds of seed every day and get it ready to be sent out to a project.
Mm-hmm. And it is cool. It was like awesome to see it at work. Like it's loud, and there's like all the seeds are getting mixed together. It was kind of awesome. And so once you get kind of your little seed mix, you get your batch going, talk about how you actually plant those, like the different methods to actually get the seed in the ground.
Yeah. One of the main methods we use is aerial seeding. Our goal is to be able to cover the seeds, just like you wouldn't go out and throw seeds on your garden and walk away. If possible, we want to be able to cover that. Oftentimes we'll, especially with the fires and things we're dealing with that cover large landscapes, we have to just aerially seed it. Then if we can, we come back with like a large chain that's pulled between two bulldozers, and it'll roll across the landscape and cover the seeds and give them a better chance at growing.
It's kind of pushing the dirt down in and
Yeah.
like rolling them into the ground. Yeah.
And
They're massive chains.
They are.
They're humongous.
Yeah, like 90-pound links.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Came off ships and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the other ways, when possible, we use like a seed drill, which is kind of like what a farmer would use to plant grain or something like that. But this is called a rangeland drill because it's been beefed up to be able to go out on rougher terrain over rocky ground as much as possible. And so in that case, you're putting the seed right into furrows, right into the ground and right where you want it, and it gets covered. And that's been shown to be pretty successful as well.
Gotcha. And kind of like you said, once these areas are planted, obviously it's not instant, as much as we would all love to just magically, Jack of the Beanstalk and there's plants immediately. How long typically does it take for an area that's been planted? Like, how long does it take for that to kind of come to fruition and you can see those plants?
Yeah. When you have dry years like this, it definitely takes more time.
Sure.
And it definitely that decreases our success. But even when we have drought years, if you go back to a site a year or two after, you might go back and think that it failed. But oftentimes, it takes 3-5 years or even longer.
Wow.
But usually when we have pretty good success, if there's not too many mitigating circumstances with weeds and other problems. But yeah, it definitely takes time, and especially it depends on, I guess, what you're looking for. When we're planting shrubs and things to restore for which are really important for wildlife habitat, often it takes 10-20 years to be able to really see that as a shrubland again. It's initially we see a lot of grasses and things to hold things.
Those
down.
will come back faster.
Yeah, and then shrubs are a slow growing thing that take much more time.
Oh, that is a long time. And is there a difference, do you feel like, with areas where we're just trying to, add more plants for wildlife versus areas that have been burned and then we're kind of resetting and replanting? Is there one that's faster than another, or is it all kind of even?
There's some variability there, and there's a lot of different potentials that we work in where, the higher up the mountain where we have more precipitation, things come back more quickly. And but on fires, it definitely is. It takes some time for perennial plants to establish. On some of the proactive work where we're removing trees or some other method and then planting, there usually are a few residual perennial plants that are beneficial that kind of pop up first, but then our seeds will fill in from there. So it in both situations it takes some time, but definitely fires, there's everybody's seeing some of the devastation around, but it comes back.
Yeah. And obviously, we've kind of talked a lot about the seed warehouse side of things, kind of the reseeding efforts. But as mentioned, in the name of the facility, we obviously also are doing research there. And so, yeah, kind of talk about what type of research. And you kind of touched on this, but kind of go into how that works.
Yeah, and that's really where our this project, our program here began, was with research, and that's in the name. The Great Basin Research Center is a lot of what we look at are what are the better methods to establish these plants or better methods for habitat restoration. So we're looking at effectiveness of different pieces of equipment and different techniques for seeding and things like that. And then one of the other areas we focus on is developing plant materials, or how do we get this native plant to grow and be able to produce seeds, and then be able to harvest those seeds and to be able to put them back on the landscape. So it takes some time and a lot of work to be able to understand the mechanisms of how these plants work, and whether or not it's ever going to be economically feasible to have that be a plant that we use in the landscape.
Gotcha. And do we ever try to grow our own like hybrid plants of like, we're like, oh, this one's really good for wildlife and this one's really good at staying alive in the winter. Let's put them together and have these plant babies. Like, do we do stuff like that?
There are a lot of other scientific groups out there, with the Federal Agricultural Research Service and other plant materials groups that are developing plant materials. And so what they do is they'll take a species and take a bunch of collections from that species from a bunch of different locations, and then they can grow them out and under a what they call a common garden, where they're all together, all these different varieties, and they'll select the ones that are the most drought tolerant or produce the most forage or things like that, and eventually then they'll release that variety, and then growers will grow it and then sell it back to us. And so as a lot of the varieties that we buy, that drought tolerance is one of the things that we really look for.
They've already kind of done that.
It's a continuing, ongoing process that they select for some of those characteristics, and at the same time we're also trying to use locally adapted plants. So we're collecting a plant from an area, and it's going to grow best probably close to where it was collected because it's been adapted genetically to grow with that kind of precipitation, that kind of soil. So we try to put it back close to where it came from.
Gotcha. And you'd mentioned, a lot of the stuff we use is obviously native to Utah. It makes sense because we know it does well, and our wildlife are used to eating it or whatever. But we also do take some that are not native.
Right.
And so is there like a higher percentage? Is it mostly native, or do we use a lot of non-native that we know do well here and are good for wildlife too?
That's a interesting topic that it goes on in scientific circles, and we're moving more and more towards natives as much as possible. There are some situations where we don't have enough stock to be able to reseed a fire with all natives, or there's sometimes we use some introduced species that can compete better with the weeds and establish faster. So ideally, native is better because our wildlife and are adapted to that.
Sure.
And there usually is more diversity when you have a native mix. So that's what we shoot for.
Interesting. And you'd mentioned when we're kind of doing the planting in the spring and we do the planting of these seeds in the fall, why typically do we pick the fall time?
Yeah, most of the time we try to get them out in the fall, like onto the ground, just kind of as they would naturally. They would have come off a plant, fall on the ground, and then they overwinter. They're collecting moisture, and then they're ready to pop up in the spring. And so working in the spring is a little more problematic because it's harder to get out on the ground. You get it's either
the frost,
the mud,
it'll get you.
Yeah, and then you're opening up the ground and you're losing moisture, and then you're a little more dependent on that spring moisture, which has been less reliable lately.
Yes, definitely, especially lately. Yeah. So we just try and follow the natural cycles just to make it easier for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's been shown to be a little more effective that way.
Gotcha. And in the instances where, like we've had drought, obviously it's a big topic, and we just talked about it in our last podcast episode, where maybe we don't get winter, the snow and things we normally would that winter. And if those plants don't take, do we just try to come back and reseed that the next year type of thing?
We try to evaluate that, and we probably usually will give it at least a couple years to kind of see how it'll do. A lot of our seeds will,
because you said it takes a while.
Yeah, some of them will persist in the soil over more than one year, and so they'll eventually pop up. But sometimes, in these really dry conditions, then we do have to go back and try it again.
Oh, it's a long game. I'm not patient enough. I don't think I do well with this. I'm the type that I plant my garden in the spring and I want tomatoes 3 months later, like I need results. So,
well, the rain definitely makes you look smarter.
Yeah, that's true. That probably helps a lot. So since obviously you've been doing this work for a long time, you mentioned you always worked in the habitat, field. So what would you say is kind of your favorite part of working in the seed warehouse and doing some of this research and things?
I really enjoy just getting out in the field and seeing various projects and being able to know what was there before and see it be improved and can have see those seeds that we put out on the ground, and when you walk across the landscape and you see that, hey, we planted this and it's looking good, that's a pretty fulfilling thing to see.
Yeah, and it is pretty remarkable. I've seen some of the before and after pictures, and it is astounding, like how some landscape, they're just totally dead and they're just overrun with trees. There's like nothing to them. And then we'll do some of these projects and reseed them, and it's like green and there's a lot of different plants, and it looks so much better. And it's like so much better, and it is kind of a domino effect, right? Like obviously the wildlife need those plants, and then they're doing better, and it's just kind of like this chain reaction. And so I could definitely see how that would be rewarding. I always like secretly say I feel like our habitat stuff is some of the most important work we do because it does have that domino effect, and it is impacting fish and wildlife, and like you said, it helps reduce wildfires, and it's this whole like cycle of things. So I think it's very impressive. Yeah. So if there's kind of, we've talked a lot obviously about the seed warehouse, the research we do, the planting. If there's one thing that you would want somebody to kind of take away from this episode, to kind of know about this work, what's kind of the main thing you would want them to know?
I guess I would say there's a lot of work going on out there with a lot of different partners that are working together that to make things better for a lot of different things, for wildlife, for livestock, for water yield. These are the things that we're with Utah's Watershed Restoration Initiative, and there's a lot of division out there, but there's a lot of people that are working closely together across different agencies and different landowners, and I think it's this program that we have is really unique across the United States, and has shown that when we help each other out, work together, we can do big things. Work for wildlife is really happening on the landscape, and it takes time, but it is doing good things for wildlife.
I love that. And I love the unity message that it takes a lot of partners, it takes a lot of funding, but it is working, and it does have those benefits.
Really, to be effective, we can't just be doing this by ourselves or one of our partners by themselves. Working together, we can make a difference.
We need everybody. Yeah, I love that. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on, kind of educating us. I think this, like I said, this is a really, really important topic, and the facility is super cool. I also feel like I've heard we do offer some public tours.
Sure. Anybody that wants to come by, if you called ahead and made an appointment, that'd probably be easier, but we're happy to show anybody what we're doing there.
Cool. Yeah, it is very impressive. Yeah, I loved going down and kind of checking it out and just learning more about it. As always, if you love listening to the podcast, we hope that you could subscribe. We release a new episode on the third Tuesday of each month. And so we hope that you'll join us next month for some more wildlife stories.